Hello and welcome to another episode of the ABC Music Talk podcast. This show falls into the disciplines category and is titled The Artist as an Entrepreneur. Originally, I was going to put this in the basics stream and just have me kind of talking about it conceptually, but then I landed an interview with an actual artist. This means I can talk specifically about the artist discipline. So, and we're going to be doing this from the point of view of an independent artist. And my guest today is the amazing DJ, producer, songwriter, and many other things, Scott Diaz. Welcome to the show, Scott.
It's a hell of an intro. Thank you.
Well, I think it's appropriate.
Thank you.
So, just to give you a quick idea of what I'm going to try and do with this is I want to introduce you and kind of learn about your beginnings. Then we'll talk about this idea of you as an entrepreneur. How it applies to you, perhaps even talk about whether it's right for everyone. And then also I wanted to just quickly sort of like talk about kind of the role of industry professionals outside of that, right? And then of course, hopefully if you've got any tips for aspiring artists and artists as entrepreneurs at the end, then we'll see about that. But so you're best known as a globe-trotting DJ, producer and remixer, pretty much in the sort of house and garage sort of arena. And I was because obviously I was reading up about you. I mean, we know each other anyway, but I realised I didn't know everything about you. And I mean, a couple of years ago you had 10 productions in the TrackSource End of Year bestsellers list, which, considering the volume of what's in TrackSource, that's pretty impressive. So you're obviously pretty prolific as well.
Yeah, I mean, TrackSource is a site that suits the music a lot of the stuff I've made over the years. As a retailer, it's customer base, I guess. What I make resonates with them, so maybe that's why there's a big spike there. That's kind of what you might call is my community,
right?
Although I would say that I make kind of stuff that's broader, but nevertheless I've done a lot of music that's done well on there. And I should say that those 10 tracks were across different genres, so it wasn't 10% of the overall top 100, but each genre that they have has a top 100. Yeah. And I might have had 2 or 3 tracks in 3 of the genres and 1 in another one. It's because I make kind of like broad stuff genre wise, that it fits into slightly different categories, and obviously that all depends on where TrackSource see it fitting or where the label see it fitting. But yeah, so it wasn't 10% of the overall top 100, but it was tracks that had been best selling in their particular area, scattered across those areas, those genres, basically.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I as I think I've said on these podcasts before, I did some work with Beatport, which is something similar, and I just know how much music goes through there that for you to have that many, still, regardless of all of the caveats you just added there, I still think it's pretty impressive. Actually, one of the other things I wanted to just briefly touch on, just for my listeners to understand, one of the reasons why I do this podcast is because Scott, well, I know Scott anyway, but he put a post out on Instagram, which it began with ABC, always be creating. Now, as you know, this is called the ABC Music Talk podcast, so there was something that caught my eye there anyway. But it was the picture that I saw, I don't know whether it was just the way it was scrolling through my timeline or not, but it was a picture of a particular microphone called a Zoom H4, and I use a Zoom H2 for recording this podcast, and it just kind of really captured my imagination. So Scott is also one of the reasons why I am actually doing this podcast, so if you hate it, blame him. So I'm curious. Actually, no, I have another question first of all. So I just described you as a DJ, a producer, and a remixer, but I know you do some other stuff. So in fact, in that Instagram post, one of the things that you were talking about was the Foley stuff that you were recording, kind of sounds of Amsterdam and that type of stuff. I mean, that isn't being a DJ necessarily, right? So, but I know that you do a few other things as well, sort of around samples and that type of thing.
Yeah.
So how would you describe yourself?
Well, I would describe myself primarily. I mean, I would say I'm a DJ and producer. I started off DJing. That's the first thing I ever did. I was buying records before I could do anything else. So I'll always see myself as a DJ. I think everything else is kind of a natural extension of that for the most part. You know, wanting to make your own music so you can play that music out and hopefully have the same impact on people as the music that you enjoy playing. And then it's just a natural process of wanting to create your own and kind of get more involved in it. But I think now there's a sense of, with the modern music business, I think there's a sense of you have to do kind of lots of things to a competent level at least. And that goes for, you know, perhaps doing your own mixing, you know, from a production perspective, maybe doing your own mastering, maybe being good at recording vocals. If you're a singer, lots of singers now record their own vocals, whereas years ago a singer would have had no clue at all what the recording process was.
Right.
And within that you've got social media, digital marketing, you know, graphic design. If you're running a label, all of these things can be kind of outsourced and shipped out, but there's a cost associated with that, either in monetary terms or you have to do something back, so you're giving up some time, and sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. But all of that's just to say that there's now this kind of, you know, instead of doing one thing really, really well, which you could have done 20 or 25 years ago, you know, you were just a vocal recording engineer, you were just a mixing engineer or an assistant. There's some dance records, house records that were released on independent labels like Casual, like owned by Kashmir and these kind of people, and you look at some of the credits and there's like 11 people involved, and it's a house record. You know, someone playing percussion, 2 people mixing it, 2 people, you know, recording vocals, etc. And there just isn't the money in sales of the actual music to facilitate that many people being involved in the recording of one song or a couple of songs, unless you've got something really specific going on, unless you're, you know, a Louis Vega and you've got lots of history and heritage and some, you know, money there and whatever else. So to go back to the, you know, the question, to circle back around, I kind of do a little bit of everything now because I think it's necessary. Right. I think the game has changed, basically. I think that looking at, you know, producers and DJs in this kind of very linear way that we used to see them, where we just say, well, they just make music and they play some records and that's it. Even if you don't get paid to do any of the other things, even just hacking your social media and posting things and creating little videos, and consumers are creators now, you know, so it's sort of almost by necessity that you have to do all of these other things. But that isn't to say that I don't enjoy some of them, because, for example, you touched on doing the samples. That's something which I kind of fell into, and I've kind of done more and more and more of it over the years.
Can you explain a little bit more? Like,
so basically, there's a market for now that the kind of barrier to entry for making music is so low, and I say that in the sense of, you know, there are iPhone apps, there are iPad apps, there's a, you know, laptops are cheap, you know, the things that you make music on have gotten cheaper. The apps or the things that you use to make them have gotten cheaper, and so that means that it's opened up sort of this accessibility and democratized it. So even my 8-year-old nephew can have an app on the iPad that he can mess around with. Well, those apps and those kind of things need sounds, and these producers need sounds to work with, and often they're not always at a competent level where they can play the keyboard, or they understand how to make a particular sound from a particular era. What keyboard was that made on? What processing was on it that made it sound a particular way, etc., etc. Right. These are the things that come not only with age, but also just with your embedding yourself into that music. You know, I'm interested in Chicago House. Oh, what were they making at the time that made it sound like that? Why is it really raw? Why is it this? Why is it that? So for somebody like me, or people that have got more experience or are interested in that kind of background and the more technical kind of nerdy side of it, it means that there's this opportunity essentially to make sounds that other people can buy. And that's essentially what it is. You put them into a marketplace and somebody else says, I really like that, that's inspiring for me to listen to, and I would like to use it. It's the equivalent of, you know, picking up a disco record and being like, wow, that bit's great, I want to use it, except you can get that without having to pay any royalties because someone's already created it in a royalty-free sense for you to use. So I kind of fell into that and kind of did a couple, and they were within my specific genre, and then I kind of started, they did pretty well, and I started getting asked to do more, and I've worked for Akai, Sample Magic, Native Instruments, Loop Masters, Novation and Focusrite, who are part of the same company. So all the major companies in that space, pretty much, I've done various things for. So yeah, it's just become something that's sort of just taken up more and more of my time over the years, and it's just something that's basically supplements my income and allows me to do all the other things I want to do, such as get really nice artwork or pay somebody to do a remix, or so it's essentially like part of the ecosystem.
This actually reminds me of, so I saw you talk on a panel at Brighton Music Conference this year. This year.
Yeah.
And one of the things that really stood out to me, because you were sitting on a panel with a bunch of other producers, and I think during the question time, it kind of got into, you know, people's processes and how they did it. And there were a few of the producers on there I felt that were probably the people that were just using the sorts of things that you were creating, whereas you were sitting there talking about scales and key signatures and all this kind of much more kind of like music, you know, sort of like the composition aspect of it.
Right.
Whereas I felt like some of the other producers, and I'm not doing air quotes, but I could be, you know, were those that were just using the kind of the loops and the samples and you know the kind of you know, the bits of kit to make music based on somebody else's music, whereas you're sitting here actually composing stuff. And actually, just you guys can't see this, but I'm sitting in Scott's studio with him, which is hopefully why the sound quality is better than anything else that I've ever recorded so far. A nice dead room, and it is absolutely jam-packed with, well, lots of outboard stuff, but keyboards everywhere, and of course record decks, being a DJ. But you know, it's clearly the workspace of somebody who is creating from scratch an awful lot of his music, and I'm not sure that is the case for every sort of, you know, dance producer.
No, I would agree, but also I think there's a distinction, because I'm a bit older now. I'm 37 now, and I kind of grew up, you know, I basically started making music when you had to use, you know, compressors and hardware units and stuff and desks and all of that, and now you don't have to use any of that stuff. And so there's just a different, you know, it is a different approach now. You can't blame somebody for, you know, for not knowing what it was like to not have a mobile phone, as an example.
100%,
this is just the era that we're in now, you know. And so there's a different way of making it, but what it does mean is that, yeah, there's people that are kind of, you know, it's a really interesting philosophical question, because dance music especially is based heavily on sampling, and one of the new projects that I'm working on is a new sample label, and it's going to, all being well, it's going to be distributed through Splice, although we're going to do our own website and stuff too. But and the idea, it's called Nightlife Audio, and it's basically focused around nightlife genres. So club culture and sort of the art of sampling are kind of the focus. That's the story. And so, you know, I'm a sort of big believer in, I'm a maker of samples, but I'm also a user of them. You know,
oh sure.
I'm also if I hear something else I like, I'm like, oh, that's great, I'll take, you know, I'll use that kick, or I'll do that, you know. So I'm a kind of consumer and a creator of these things, and sometimes you're in that creation mode and you've got all your things and you're messing around with everything and you're in that zone, and sometimes you're like, I want something that inspires me. I want to just grab something and
right.
oh, I can hear an idea around this already, and that's why sampling is so powerful. That's why, you know, Daft Punk and all these people that have done really well out of it. It's essentially, it's like taking something and just re-envision, you know, giving it a new vision, essentially.
Well, also you're making music for the audience, right? And so using samples is a great way of making something immediately not obvious, but appealing to them, because they perhaps have heard it before somewhere else, right? And so there's this sort of, that triggers sort of memories of moments before when they've heard it before, right? Yeah,
there's a nostalgic element to it for sure, and you're sort of condensing all of this musical feeling and emotion and musicianship and talent. You know, for example, with an old disco record, you're taking that 1 or 2 bars of a Patrice Rushen tune, and you're sort of condensing, you know, 8 or 10 people that might have been playing on it, and the recording and all the techniques and everything that went into it, and you're condensing that into a 3-second bit of energy that you can then loop over, and, you know, in the case of those kind of samples, or whether it's, you know, taking as a lot of old hardcore records used to take things from, you know, weird places like a Kate Bush track, or kind of very like esoteric sort of textural things. And so I came up on samples, you know, when I was 16, 17, 18, and my friends and I kind of banded our, you know, bit of money together to buy some basic equipment, like a sampler, like a basic desk, and, you know, kind of a couple of cheap effects units. We were all just kind of learning together, and we were just, it was all samples. That was how you made things then. I wasn't a classically trained musician. I didn't even have a piano lesson until I was 21.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like I grew up playing piano from the age of 5 or 10, and so I had this very musical kind of approach to it. It was very much like, yeah, let's take that and put it in there, and, you know, trim it up and stab, you know, very kind of like very sort of
so this
prehistoric stabbing on the keyboard kind of thing, you know. And that's really what a lot of dance music was, you know, messing around with a drum machine, and that's kind of where it all came from. So I'm in favour of samples and of the sort of culture of sampling. And I guess what we're trying to do with Nightlife is, the idea is to take it big and be really ambitious with it as we build it up, so we can actually do things like actually make.
So is Nightlife the name of the sample label?
Nightlife Audio is the name of the sample label,
cool.
yeah. And what we're going to do with that is eventually just take it to a place where we can actually get things like disco sessions done, and actually create samples from disco records that we've made, that then actually can then be sold as royalty free. So people can actually use these as in the same way they would from sampling from a disco record, but without any of the legal repercussions. That's the idea. And then there's so much other scope within that, because all of the like jungle and drum and bass and garage and house and all of this, they're all based on samples. So that's the idea with it. So yeah, so it takes up a fair bit of my time. It's ebbed and flowed over the years. Some years I've only made, like, you know, probably 10 or 15 records in that year, because I've just been focusing on so much on other things. And then other years it's been completely opposite. I might have done 1 or 2 projects for sound design, and everything else has been, you know, tracks. So it does depend, but that's.
You mentioned Splice as well. Just for the benefit of the people listening, just talk about Splice a little bit as what that is.
So Splice started out as a collaboration platform. That was the original intention, as I understand it. It was for people to upload their DAW, you know, Logic Pro or Ableton projects, and basically it would synchronize it in the cloud, and then somebody else could actually get access to that. You could give them access to your project, and then you can essentially collaborate.
Pre-SoundCloud?
This is
because it's kind. I mean, I know it's a different type of thing, but
it was after, I think. It's been around a few years, but it's a big company. It's a major thing now. You know, they've got a big office in Manhattan. It's backed by, you know, I think it's backed by like guys that went to like Yale, and so it's like
some clever people,
some very serious people, yeah. And what happened is, my understanding of it from the people that, you know, I know a couple of people that work there and that are involved in it, and so my understanding from what they told me is that once the collaboration platform was set up, and then the sounds were kind of tacked on as an additional, like, hey, we should give people some sounds to use, you know, and then very quickly that became the focus. Everybody was probably like, actually, this is the business. This is what we should be doing. And so it's just grown. It's become you know, they basically pioneered the single download sound. So for years and years, it was all about buying full packs, and what you had to do is you had to basically, you know, make the content for the pack, which meant you had to make loads of content because people wanted value. They wanted a gigabyte of sounds for £35, right? Because this was the kind of, psychologically, people wanted that. Well, this is a lot of sounds. It wasn't, you know, it almost...
We used to buy them on CDs, right? So you'd buy a CD full of sounds.
Yeah, and so then that equivalent thing became like, now we don't have to print a CD, but you still have to buy the full pack. Well, the problem that you had is that if you made a really good demo song, you could potentially sort of misrepresent the pack, if that's the right way of putting it. You could use all the best sounds in the demo, and then all the filler stuff you wouldn't put in the demo, but somebody would still buy the pack, right? The other thing was that what you were really paying for when you purchased that pack was you were paying for a license to use the sounds as well. So you weren't just paying for the sounds, you were paying for a license to use those sounds royalty free, almost like a, you know, like you would do with a sample, except you were only paying £35. Well, Splice came along and said, well, we want to give people the choice of individual downloads. Everything else is a la carte. iTunes is a la carte.
Right, I was going to say, I mean, that was ultimately what Apple did to the music industry. They said,
Absolutely.
no longer can you have an album of 10 tracks with only 2 singles on it. You've now got to, you know, and you're forcing the consumer to buy the whole album.
Yeah.
Now everyone can get just the songs that they want.
Yeah.
And
so you're right. It's basically an extension of what was already going on outside of the sample world.
Yeah.
And so they basically set up this fantastic system for doing it. It's great. You scroll through, the sounds are tagged, because of course when you're doing it in that fashion, the tagging has to be really good, so you know exactly what you're looking for. You know, I'm looking for a brass, a saxophone or trumpet sample in the key of A flat minor, and you can, like, you know, drill down and find exactly that. Search by what samples are called, you know, keywords and so on. So, and then it just grew. It just became this platform where they've got, you know, amazing, I mean, high level people. We're talking about, you know, Scott Storch has just done a pack. Travis Barker has done a drums pack. You know, it's like, it's almost like if you could have a label and it was a sample label and you could get the best possible people to do packs, what would that look like, and who would you get? You'd get Kendrick Lamar's producer, you'd get, Scott. That they've taken it to that place, and obviously that involves having the money and the funding and all the rest of it. But they've grown it amazingly, and it's a subscription service, so they need consistently new content, and so that's what Splice is. It's kind of changed the game in that sense. Luke Masters, you know, who I worked closely with before, they kind of revolutionised it, because they took it all online from the CD era. They were kind of the first people to say, hey, we've got this sample marketplace and everything's online now. Yeah. And they were the, you know, one of the first people to get artist packs consistently, Carl Cox and these kind of people. And then Splice have come along and kind of, you know, said, right, now we're going to do single downloads and we're going to take it here. And so that's I'm just in a discussion with Splice at the moment about hopefully having them distribute the label.
Oh, wonderful. Which makes sense, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. There's the kind of samples that we're going to be specialising in, and my contacts in the business in that particular world, in the dance music world, the people that I can sort of pull in, because the idea is to make everything authentically. You know, it's none of this, like, as you say, like people using, you know, people say. One of the problems with the sample industry was that people were basically just taking stuff from other people and saying that they made it, right? Yeah. They would take a stab, create a riff out of it, but they didn't create the stab in the first place. They sampled it. And that's all well and good if you're using it in a track, but you can't sell that to somebody else as a royalty-free sample. Yeah. So there was all this, you know, there wasn't these standards around the industry like there maybe is now, or there has been and I've had lots of discussions with this with different people, but kind of trying to get this standard of, like, you know, these are sound sources that you can use, these are not. You know, you can't say something is a Rhodes piano if it's not a Rhodes piano. Yeah. You can say it's an electric piano if you made it with a VST, but you can't tell somebody it's a Rhodes, because that implies that you used a real keyboard. So we've kind of been getting sessions done, and you know, as you can see here, I've got things to process things through, so I've actually got outboard gear. Because this is important for the credibility of, like, hey, I'm actually doing it properly, and you can actually see what we're doing and all the rest of it. So if you say something's been recorded to cassette and then processed, it actually has. You know, there's all kinds of other things. We've got people that do stuff for us, like they'll run sounds through VHS and give us back the samples. It's called a resampling service. That's kind of an industry that's popped up.
That's amazing.
It's like, hey, you don't have an MPC 60? I do. Give me all those sounds and I'll put them through an MPC 60 and charge you X. And now you can actually say, these sounds were processed through MPC 60, then we did this with them, and, you know, so it's all that kind of stuff, but it's doing it in a way that gives people peace of mind, is really authentic, and it can be really fun, because you're like, you know, you're sort of sourcing pieces of equipment. I want to do a Chicago house pack, right, well, I need to get a Juno 106, I need to get that, and, you know, so that's kind of what we're going to do with it, and do it all properly in an authentic way that actually is as close to the way that people would have made it at the time. Especially when it comes to all the early 90s jungle, using samplers, using old Roland Space Echo delays, using old desks and distortion units and all of that. So it's a big project in amongst all the other stuff I'm doing, but we'll see.
But it absolutely is a good example of why I wanted to talk to you in particular on this subject of the artist as an entrepreneur, because, I mean, you are blending both of those disciplines together like almost like continuously, right? It's obviously heavily artistic in terms of what you're doing there, because it is about sound, it is about audio, it's about understanding kind of the makeup of composition, all the rest of it. But you know, ultimately there's this sort of other business side to it, which is different from, you know, being a DJ booked in a club, right? You know, so you're not just a DJ doing that, you are thinking continuously about your entire kind of world, and that's where that entrepreneurial spirit really kicks in, I think, for you in particular. You talked a little bit about some of your background, but I don't think I know your complete origin story. I don't know how you ended up having your own studio in England and as I say, like being a globe-trotting DJ. But I mean, where did it come from? Did you play a musical instrument before? Like, were you
No, I didn't. As I said earlier, I didn't have any piano lessons till I was 21. I was interested in music from about. I mean, I was always, you know, there was something about it I liked. When I was sort of 11 or 12, I'd always listen to stuff on the radio, Andy Kershaw, old radio shows, and I used to ask my dad for like blank tape so I could record stuff on the radio. And I remember I had a double cassette tape deck, and I would record stuff off the radio, the top 40, and I remember mixing. There was a Robson and Jerome released a cover of Unchained Melody.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And it was essentially like a ballad, right? So it had like no drums. It's all like very light, sort of brush drums or something. And then there was this. There was a song called Blurred. I don't know if you remember that. It was a cover of the Blur Boys Who Like Girls. I can't remember what that song's called, but I think it's called Boys and Girls. But there was a dance version of that. Somebody basically bootlegged it and did a dance version, and it was called. The guy was called. I think it was, the song was called Piano Man Blurred. Okay? It was obviously released as a bootleg, and then it basically got in the charts.
Yeah. I mean, that used to happen quite a lot, right?
Yeah. And so this record was like a kind of a dance. It was like I didn't know it at the time, but it was house music, right? It's commercial house. And funny enough, I'm now friends with that guy who made it on Facebook. You know, Piano Man, as he called himself. And I remember trying, because this Robson and Jerome track didn't have any drums, I could put it over the top of the other track.
Okay.
Now, of course, it was completely out of time, but I kind of liked this idea of I could put this vocal on top of this other thing that it didn't belong to.
Interesting.
And so that's kind of like would be a very early version of mixing.
That was the genesis, was it?
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So then I was into that, and then I basically went to. I was at school and I borrowed a tape of a friend of mine. I've told this story quite a few times in different like blogs, interviews, and whatever. But there was a kind of like, it was basically the time of like rave culture. It's kind of like 93, 94. I mean, it's kind of the tail end of it, obviously, but this was when kind of all the big raves were popping up. Dreamscape, Tasmania, Helter Skelter, all these kind of things. They were at big airfields and stuff, and I was a bit too young to go at that point. But my friend got a tape pack, and everything was done through tape packs back then. You know, they would obviously record the raves and put them out on an 8 tape pack, so you could essentially relive it. Right. And you know, it would spread the sound further and get more people involved. So there was this one tape, and I borrowed it off a friend. His name's Ricky Rutherford, and I borrowed it off him at school. And it was Dreamscape 11, DJ Psy, and LSD on the other side. I think it was the 1st of July, 1994.
Wow.
That was on the date on the tape. It's called The Pinch and the Punch. That was kind of the tagline they gave the rave, because it was the first of the month.
Is it on YouTube?
It's on YouTube, yeah. And it's on YouTube. I've got the MP3 of it, and that was the tape. That was a tape that kicked it off for me. I took that tape home. I had a Walkman, and I would just listen to this one tape, and I would fall asleep with it. And that, it just went round. It just went round and round. And from this moment, I was just obsessed with this sound. And then after that, I started going out at like 16. I was going out to like, you know, illegal raves around Brighton and outside the area. I was going to clubs. We were going to Hastings Pier. We were going to Atomics in Maidstone.
I used to go to Atomics as well.
Atomics was it's kind of a dark place. Atomics, but
100%.
we loved our. You know, we had a friend who's DJ up there, so we used to go with him. Sometimes he would do that. He used to play drum and bass and garage, actually, funny enough. But so we went with him. That was great. We used to go to Astoria in London and all these kind of things. And then I basically, within this, I've met like a group of like-minded people. Excuse me.
Sorry.
And I've met a group of like-minded people, and we sort of, you know, started building a little studio, putting a little studio together, and So that was kind of where it all came from.
Yeah, amazing. So I've really sort of natural. Well, you've come from being a fan to wanting to participate in it, I suppose. And obviously finding a skill set that originated from Robson and Jerome, which is just wonderful.
I think for me it was I've never found it. I've always been into it, but I've never found that I was completely a natural.
Right.
Like I struggled with a lot of things. I wouldn't say that. Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't know whether to accurately say, like, what defines whether somebody's a natural. Is it just that they've been doing it before they can even remember what they were doing? Like, if you play piano since you were 4 years old, you don't really have any conscious idea of kind of what you're doing. You're just, your mum tells you you've got a piano lesson every week and you just do it. And then by the time you get to 10 or 11 or 12, you're probably really good because she's made you practice. MJ Cole always tells a story about how his mum wouldn't let him go out and play skateboard until he'd done his 2 hours of practice every day.
Goodness.
And now he's like, he's
drilled it into
Royal College of Music,
of course,
like one of the best
legend.
musicians in the country. So so I think we could say that somebody like that's a natural, but he's been doing it since he was 4 years old. And there's obviously an element of being sort of coerced as well, like your parents, something that when you're 4 you don't know what's best for you and they do, and so you have to make the kids do things sometimes. So you could, even from a philosophical perspective, say, well, it's not natural then because you made him do it, right? It would be natural if he just decided to get on the piano every day without any input from you, but that's probably quite rare that happens. So I don't know if I'm a natural at anything really. I've just kind of persevered basically and haven't given up, and everything I think in this business especially is an endurance test. The people that stick in it for the longest tend to do the best, and I don't think that's a coincidence.
So I have an episode in this series that sort of talks about this, and I've got this kind of general thing that pretty much most people in the music industry are enthusiasts. Right, I mean that's pretty much, you've got to be an enthusiast, otherwise you kind of come and then you leave again, right? Because it either grabs you or it doesn't, and certainly for myself and you, it is the way it is. Okay, so we talked about you as a DJ, a producer, and a recording artist. Songwriter is, I guess, implicit in some of this, but you're also your own manager. Is that right?
I'd say so. Yeah,
like your own artist manager. You'll see where I'm going with this in a minute. Your own record label, Grand Plans, and what was it, the sample? Nightlife.
Yep.
Booking agent. I think you do some of that yourself, if not all.
Kelly, my wife, does quite a few of the emails and stuff that come in. We obviously consult on it, but she sort of takes part of that admin job away. Hey, these things need replying to, and so she'll sort of deal with that so that I can do more creative stuff. But and I've got an agent in Australia, but for the most part it's all done by me.
But I guess where I'm going with this is, going back to the subject of this podcast, artist as an entrepreneur, they're having to be more and more commonly fulfilling the roles that were traditionally done by other people in the music industry. Right. These are very specific jobs. If you have a manager, that is what they are. They're not also your mix engineer necessarily, right? They are your artist man. And so, I mean, and publishing, do you kind of outsource that, or do you try and?
I tend to do single song assignments.
Yeah.
I do. Black Rock Publishing look after the label. I know Mark Lawrence pretty well, and him and his wife are nice, and they kind of run it as a joint company. They're from Brighton. I think they used to live in Brighton at least. They've moved to Spain or one of the Spanish islands.
Everyone seems to be going to Spain.
They love it. They love it over there. It's great. But so they do the label. So anything that comes out on Grand Plans automatically goes to them. Mm-hmm. But anything else that I do can be assigned to anybody. So if I don't have any publishing for it, I can just give it to them and say, do you guys want to administrate this? Whereas if somebody comes along like a Defected and says, can we take the publishing, then it's available. And it works well for me to do that. I don't think in this day and age it's worth you having a publishing deal unless
is a whopping great big advance.
Unless you're getting an advance, unless you're getting some money up front, and they're actually doing something,
and perhaps even supporting you, like creative.
No, of course. If there's a structure around it where it's like, well, look, I'm also your manager and this and that and the other, and we also do some publishing, but we've got contacts to get syncs and do all this kind of stuff, then you might want to consider doing that. But if you're somebody like me, who for the most part is kind of freelance, doing, you know, different projects here and there. You kind of want the freedom to be able to say, well, actually, you know, Ministry want this record, and it kind of makes more sense for me to give them the publishing on these 2 tracks.
Yeah.
And then over here, you know, these 2 tracks can go to this label, and so I think it makes more sense to do it that way.
Yeah. But ultimately, these are still business decisions that you are still making yourself.
Sure.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, one of the other things that I know that you do is you are kind of your own marketing department. Again, sort of one of those roles that, you know, if you were signed to a major label for a 5-album deal or something, you're a very traditional kind of style, you probably wouldn't even be thinking about this stuff as much, right? Because you would just assume that there are all these people taking care of it, and they would come to you with ideas. And
right.
You're running your own socials, you've got your own podcast. I mean, you presumably running your own mailing list that's on your website.
Yep.
Right. So these are things that otherwise people would have to do. But you as the artist, kind of to some of the stuff you were talking about earlier, you just found that it's just either cheaper to do it yourself rather than employ someone to do it, right? And and it's so yeah. So I mean, do you find yourself thinking about, right, how else do I market these things? Like, are you running sort of paid ads and sort of working with SEO?
For some things, yeah. We'll do paid ads for the label. We'll do kind of like just a short Instagram stories video or something like that. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think that it dilutes the music. Is probably the takeaway from it all.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean it's not. Doesn't, it has to be done, but it does mean that you don't have to. You don't have as much time to spend on creative things, or putting as much time into something as you would like, or even just having that period of time where you just think about that you don't have to create anything, because that's kind of like what Erykah Badu calls your downloading period. Like she doesn't believe in writer's block. She believes in a downloading period. So it's like this idea of taking time to absorb things that are going on, and then at that point you'll be able to then either you'll be ready to create again, or you're feeling something, you're going through something, you're downloading that, you're absorbing it, and then you can get to a point where you can actually start to write that down and put it into words if you're a songwriter like her, or artist like her. Or it might be sometimes you're just absorbing, you're taking stuff in, and there's less chance now for that to happen
because you're distracted by
it's like if you're on Instagram and you're looking at other people's content, and you're looking at other people's life, and it's all presented in a particular way that makes them look as if they're doing better than ever, doing more than ever. You feel pressure because you're like, I'm not doing anything right now. I'm sitting here in bed. I just woke up, or I should be out. I should, and
I have
jump
to
up.
say that there's something that I find almost evil about some of those blog posts where people are like, you need to be up at 5 a.m. every day and go for a run and do some meditation and do a bit of yoga and it's like what before normal life. Come on, that's not how that works.
I think to go back to your point about how people are I think it's rare that somebody is equally excellent at lots of different things. You may be excellent at 2 things and then kind of good or okay or decent at a few other things. But if you have a manager who kind of, it isn't just about their skill set, although that's important. It's also about the balance and the view and the outside perspective, and that applies to management. That applies to music making. And anything creative really. And now we're in a position where you can release a piece of music into the world before one other person's heard it. You never used to be able to do that. You used to have your manager, let's say, then there would be a record label, A&R, probably 2 or 3 people would make that decision. Then you would have a distributor. So even just on an independent level, if you had a label and you wanted to put a piece of music out, the artist would come to you, the label say yes, distributor says, no, this is rubbish. I can't sell this. no one's going to take it.
Yeah.
Then they do agree to. Then you find something they do agree to distribute. Then the record shops have to take it.
Yeah.
Right.
You got to do the sales job.
Then you've got to do the sales job. You're playing something down the phone.
Yeah.
That's the way it used to be done. You would play records down the phone. So now, not only does your record have to be great, but it also has to translate across the phone in 1997. Yep, we'll take 20 of those or whatever. So there was all these kind of like different quality control measures in place, and now that's completely gone.
Anyone,
right? And so you don't have this perspective. You can get like very close to your own music, and you are by definition very close to it, and it's impossible to hear certain things. I'm sitting in a certain room that's been treated a certain way, and I probably make the same quote mistakes when I'm mixing. You know, there's probably a certain frequency that's like a little bit too high or a little bit too muddy.
Right.
I have somebody that I work with that does all my mastering, and they know what this space is. They've been here.
Yeah.
They talk to me about stuff all the time, so they can actually correct anything that I'm doing, right? Whereas people, if I was mixing and mastering in here,
have they got a Scott Diaz preset on their
not
desk?
quite, but you know, but it's their head is the preset,
Sure.
I guess,
Yeah.
because they know, like, okay, well, it's always a little bit, maybe you know, there's a little bit too muddy here, and
Sure.
needs a little bit brightening up here because of what your room's doing, or the way your ears are. And
Yeah.
so if you have somebody that you have that relationship with, but again, that's somebody else that's in the quality control department essentially for you.
And
It's
if
like
you're,
part
if
of
you're
your
using
team.
a lander or something like that, you're not going to get
Exactly,
that.
and you're doing it in the same room. So any mistakes that you're making are not going to be exposed because you're using the same room.
Yeah.
So there's all of these kind of things, and what it means is that the creativity gets diluted ultimately, because you don't have as long to work on music as you want to. Yeah. Because everything's about visibility and constantly pushing stuff out to remain visible.
Yeah, actually, I mean, just on that subject, I saw something. Apple did a small documentary, and it was an interview with Jimmy Iovine and Dr. Dre, and right at the end, they were talking about hip hop in particular, and the sort of the you know, they felt that there was a quantity over quality at the moment,
right?
And then Jimmy Iovine sort of ended it with a kind of, you know, how about making something that's going to last, like in terms of like timeless music, as opposed to just kind of, just to your point, just kind of keep rushing stuff out. I mean, it's very hard, isn't it, because of things like Instagram, to something you said earlier, this idea of you're watching the world around you, and it seems to be moving at such a quick pace, and you have to kind of keep contributing, keep like being part of it. I mean, it's an awful pressure, really.
It's the way that because of the way the retailers turn over, you know, the beat ports, the track sources, the iTunes, even, you're there for a week and then you're gone. It is a little bit different in the hip hop R&B world, maybe in that world it's slightly different, because there isn't really the idea of going out and doing DJ gigs. There's performances and concerts, but there's not the same concept around gigs. And the reality is, you know, let's just be honest about it. The reality is, if you're not DJing every single week, you're struggling to make a living. You're struggling to make a living, because you can't make a living out of putting music out unless you're putting out 50 or 60 or 70 tracks a year, and you manage to make 500 quid or £1,000 out of every single track. So I'm just wondering if I should just go and tell them to turn it down a bit.
Okay, no worries. Well, it's okay. So I'll just keep going. There's a little bit of noise outside the studio, so Scott's just going to go and correct that particular mistake. Obviously this episode has sort of gone down the route of you know, really diving into the world around an artist, and kind of how they're you know, spending their time and living their lives. And really, this is what I wanted to get out of this episode, which is to sort of try and understand, you know, some of those distractions that are creeping into.
Sorry about that.
What should always be a creative process. That's all right, Scott. Thank you. I appreciate you doing that.
Yeah. So the problem is that, you know, I think it does dilute the music, because you end up with all of these other things to do. You can't spend as much time focus on the actual artistic element or making something as good as it could possibly be, because you're now just in a, well, it's good enough and let's get it out, and you know, and you are kind of stuck in this cycle of if you're not, because ultimately there's so much music coming out, as you've alluded to, even just on, I think even on TrackSource there's about 2,000 tracks a week. And on Beatport, it's about 20,000 a week. Yeah. Now, so what you're trying to do is you're basically trying to be in the top 4 or 5% of those every week. And I'm lucky that I pretty much am. Yeah. But even so, that doesn't you know, then you start to have to crack the next part of the code, which is, how do I turn that and leverage that into actual into gigs, into actual money.
Right.
It's not enough to just be in the top 10 of something. You have to have all the other stuff going on around it for people to actually want to buy into you as an artist. Then you start getting into this whole image over music, which is now a big part of it too.
Yeah.
You get people getting, you know, booked because they basically are like the centre of attention.
DJing.
Yeah. So but even within house music, there's now an element of like people that don't make their own stuff, but they basically trade on their personality, right? And they get booked because that's what resonates. We're kind of an image obsessed, celebrity obsessed culture at the moment, and that seems to resonate with people. So, you know, that's what they buy into. And of course there's an age thing maybe going on. I'm 37 now. Lots of people that go out 18, 19, 20, 21. I cared about different things when I was that age. I looked at different things. You know, so I have to accept that things move and you have to move with them. Yeah. But yeah, the reality is there's so much music being released, and there just isn't. There's so much music being released, and there just isn't enough. There's never going to be enough clubs or gigs to facilitate everybody. So, what do? You have to do other things. You have to be an entrepreneur. Yeah, the way I see it.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, like you know, almost every time you're explaining kind of part of your day to day, your life, you're flipping between being that creative to then having to be, you know, that entrepreneur, that business person that, you know. And I have a question about this in a second, but so just a couple of things before I get to that. So I mean, so these are kind of two questions, but in one. Do you enjoy being the master of your own destiny, or would you like to have a larger team kind of running around and doing some of these things because it is interrupting that creative process?
It's an interesting question because someone once said to me they don't think I'd be easy to manage.
Really?
Yeah, my friend who's an agent, he's actually an agent who looks after a lot of techno artists. And I think it was more just the fact that because I've got very specific ideas and I've already got a lot of stuff going on, it would be hard for me to have somebody that's like, okay, look, you know, this is where you need to go. Yeah. Because I do enjoy kind of musically being quite free and being like, oh, I want to make garage today, or I'm going to do this today, or I'm going to work on that today, or, you know, whatever the case may be. So I like being the master of my own destiny in that sense. But I think, you know, you can benefit from having somebody who sort of believes in what you're doing and actually says to you, look, this is where my expertise are. This is where I can get you involved. Yeah. This is what I can do for you. And this is what, when I hear your stuff, this is what I hear. And this is where I see you. Yeah. Let me work on that and let's see where we go with it. And that confidence is good to have when you've got somebody that's like, okay, they've actually got a vision for me. They're seeing something that I can't actually see. And if you believe in that person and you like them and you've got, you know, good feeling and good relationship with them, then that's can be a really positive thing. Because there is an element of within being the master of your own destiny that you end up just doing everything because you can. Yeah. Whereas if somebody's like, well, if you just focused here and you stop doing this as much as you enjoy it, if you just stop doing this bit and do more of this stuff over here, you would actually see this would help you tenfold. Because I can do this and this will get you involved with that person or whatever. So having that focus and that discipline from somebody else to say, this is where I see you fitting in, what do you think, can be good. So there's an element of that, but also I mean there's management, there's agents, you know. What it all boils down to basically is if you want to make money as an electronic music artist, for the most part, let me rephrase that. If you want to make money as a producer, it has to be generally as a DJ producer, unless you are working in a very specific world where, you know, you're working with the likes of the Sam Smiths or the pop artists, or you know, because you can make money just writing songs and being a producer in that world. Doing electronic stuff and dance stuff, really, you have to supplement it by being a DJ.
The margins are just too small.
You can't make enough music to, you know, unless you get really lucky and have a sync or something like that, or two in a year, you might make, you know, 80, 100,000, but you'd have to basically make 50 records and have a bunch of them do well. So the agent is the answer, but you already have to have a lot of stuff going on to have an agent take you on. So
it's sort of related to all of this, and you've touched on it a little bit. This idea of like creative block, and there's two things to me for the artist as the entrepreneur. One, there's this sort of, you know, the creative, the songwriting, the producing, like you might end up with creative block there, but also because you're running and planning your own campaigns, like you've got a new record, or, you know, you said earlier that you don't just do house and garage, you do some other styles of music, thinking about how creatively can I socialize this, you know, this new idea, this, I mean, even Grand Plans is a sort of slight departure from, you know, what you're typically known for, right?
Yeah.
So do you run into that, or are you quite well at managing that? Like, do you have your download period that you mentioned earlier?
Yes and no. I think the most dangerous thing that we have now is basically overwhelm. You know,
right?
We're overwhelmed with information all the time in the digital world because we're constantly connected to the world through our phones and whatnot. And because there's this kind of pressure to do everything, you can end up sort of being overwhelmed by it and sort of doing nothing, because you think there's so many things I have to get through here, in terms of, you know, like for example doing a Grand Plans release. There's a whole bunch of stuff that has to happen: mastering, artwork, the promo blurb, PR. Whether you do that yourself or pay somebody else, we've always paid other people to do stuff, getting little stickers and bits of merchandise and everything done. Having a mailing list, you know, then the release comes out. How are you talking about the release? What assets and content have you got to actually showcase that release? Who's playing it? That becomes a new thing you can then talk about. Oh, so and so played it at this festival. Great. Then, you know, have you got a clip of it? Okay, then you share that. And it's just kind of an ongoing, becomes a living thing that every day you have to dedicate some time to for at least 2 or 3 weeks.
Right.
And then of course the bigger and better companies, the real professional labels, have got this kind of evergreen stuff, like, right, we'll put that in for 3 months later and we'll talk about it again later on. Who remembers when so-and-so released this album? Great, you know, and then you're sort of in this cycle again. And that's the way you really have to do it if you really want to be taken seriously as a business in that sense, whether it's a label or whatever it is. But so I try to, but, you know, my days are pretty full, to be honest. I'm always pretty much, if I'm not with my wife, which I haven't been for the last 19 months because she's been living in America and I've been back over here in Brighton, but I'm basically working all the time. I'm working all the time. If from the moment I wake up, there's even if it's just doing a post on Instagram or messing around with a video and making something to post the next day, I'm always doing something. But then I've kind of always been like that. Even before I had a mobile phone, I was always sort of doing something. Like, I always say to people, if they ask for advice, I would say, if you want to make music, learn to play music. That's the first thing, which I always say, even though people go, oh, it doesn't matter this much these days. I think it's more important than ever. And I always say, and every single day you have to do at least one thing that your future kind of DJ, producer, career self will thank you for. Whether that's just making a piece of content, whether that's going to a party to make a contact, whether that's, you know, building a relationship with somebody, a friendship, going supporting your community that you want to be involved in, whether that's house, garage, tech house, techno, whatever it is. And so I've kind of tried to live by that ethos, basically. Every single day, do something positive for your career, if that's what you want it to be. Because like I said earlier, the people that do it for the longest are generally the ones that do the best. And you have to stick in it and be able to stick in it. And you're not going to do that by being lazy, basically.
Do you ever feel like you need to just not do anything, like sit on a beach and read a book?
Yeah, I'd love to. I'd love to, but I'm not yet in a position where I don't think I haven't got enough sort of stuff going. I've got lots of things going on around me, but I'm not in a position either financially and also in terms of having sort of, like you talk about, having a team of people around you, whereas, you know, if I had somebody else who was, I don't know, let's say I had somebody that was managing me and they were doing all my social media, right, like a label would do for a sort of more, you know, traditional artist style. They might say, right, look, well, now this is your calendar for the next month. We've basically put all these things in for you.
And here you've got a week where you can just kind of take yourself away.
And then, but you're still visible online. You're still, you know. I think I made a post recently about I hadn't posted anything online, and I've been really busy, but I've just been in this mode recently where I'm just like, it's tiring for me to think about how I can present myself on social media. this is fine. Like, talking is easy because
sure.
I've got so many ideas and experiences and thoughts around everything, and this is the kind of discussion me and you would have anyway.
Yeah,
right. So so from that perspective, it doesn't really use much energy.
Yeah.
But to be like, well, I've got to put this into a, if I had to create a piece of content for something, or I've got to think about how I talk about this. I just want to be creative right now. Mm-hmm. I want to just make music. I want to not be distracted. I've got a lot going on personally with my wife coming over and moving, and this is just, I'm trying to like sort of, not do any of that stuff, but then also I'm cognizant of the fact that, you get this like, I don't want people to forget what I'm doing,
Yeah, right.
So
right,
I put a thing up saying,
hey, is that
I've been quite, oh yeah,
it's a nagging thing, yeah,
constantly.
Yeah.
I will literally, I'll look on Instagram and be like, I only made 2 posts this month. I made 2 posts this month. And I'll reshare things other people do on Instagram
just
stories
to
and whatever.
stay kind of in
the
loop,
but even
right?
that doesn't feel like it's enough. Because there's people now that are like, content marketing is the way.
Yeah.
Like, that's how you establish yourself as an authority and give yourself credibility in that market. You build a community. You don't sell to people, they buy from you. I don't even mean that in a like product, like you're going to buy this from me. I just mean in terms of what they think of you, their respect for you, the fact that they see you as an authority or somebody with credibility in that space, whether that's sound design, playing jazz piano, as a DJ, a selector, a digger of great music. I follow this person because they're always putting up all this rare house and garage vinyl.
Yeah.
They're a credibility, and they're an authority in their marketplace. They may not be doing it in a conscious way, but by what they're doing, they are doing that. Somebody's like, I want to learn how to make a kick drum, so I follow Scott.
Sure.
Right, and then so you kind of build up this thing over time. So that's the way you have to do it, but you have to be absolutely relentless with it. People would say that you should be making 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pieces of content a day and putting them across all the platforms.
It's crazy.
There are some companies that they generate 100 pieces of content a day.
Wow.
But that's through breaking it down into, like, so you're a podcast, then you could break this down into Instagram snippets, right? Then you could put that on SoundCloud too. Then you can put it on LinkedIn. That all counts as a separate piece of content. But yeah, so
I mean the label that I work with, we have a very large, given the size of the company, a very large digital marketing team, and I know from artists that I've signed to the label, when it comes to release day, there's this huge checklist of things, and it's, there's all this kind of social skins that have got to be created. You've got like the edits from the video that you've done for the different platforms, and there's like then a series of them that comes out, and there's a kind of calendar, like post this, then post that, then post that one later on, and it is pretty relentless. But of course that's great for those artists because they got a team of people doing it, but you're having to do this yourself. I mean, I can't even quite imagine how that works, really.
I think the funny thing is as well that what I'm starting to see, I was doing a podcast for a while. I was doing not a talk podcast, but just a mix podcast, radio show type thing, and it was taking up quite a lot of my time.
It was once a month.
It was once a month, and I was also doing the other side mixes, which are kind of like a sort of curated set of mixes based around a particular theme, and I basically take time to put them together. I actually buy records for it. So so when I did the Filter Disco one, I had a bunch of the roulette stuff and a bunch of the old French house stuff, but there was a couple of other things I didn't have, and I wanted to put them in the mix. So I bought the tracks, I ripped them from vinyl, I put them in the playlist, I curate it all. I've never played the tracks together before. It's all new, so I have to figure out on the fly how it's all going to work.
Of course,
then I have to put that up and talk about it, and the idea was I was going to kind of do that in between doing the podcast. So I was going to do basically a mix every 2 weeks, and then you get asked to do guest mixes. So in the end I just stopped doing the radio show because I just thought the amount of time, I'm going to probably start it up again, but I won't do it on a monthly. I'll just do it by episode 1, 2, 3. That means I can do them as frequently or as infrequently as I want, because people are not relying on it each month.
I'll be honest with you, I'd taken exactly the same approach with this podcast.
It's the best way to do it.
I didn't know how like easy or hard it was going to be, so I at no point have I said there is going to be a new episode every single week.
Right.
I mean,
it's the best way of doing it. And so, especially when you're basically giving this content away for free, it's all completely for free.
Of course, yeah.
So but your time goes into it, and so to actually, so I stopped doing that. And I thought to myself, I'm still doing the other side mixes. The next one's going to be a gospel grooves one.
Oh, cool.
So I'm kind of finishing putting that together, and then I'll mix that at some point in the next week or so, next week and a bit. But the idea is that, I'm kind of looking at things now and thinking, for all of the social media that you do, for all of the DJ mixes, for all of the, trying to make funny content and putting silly videos up and memes and all this kind of stuff, which is cool and is important and is funny and we all like consuming, nothing will propel you anywhere near as quickly as just making a really good record. Mm-hmm. That's really what it boils down to.
Yeah.
So you can have all the social media presence, you can do all this stuff, and you can and you can build it up so incrementally, and it's almost painful to do it over. Or you can just make a track and
put that out.
That track goes number 1 on Beatport or top 10 on Beatport. It will do exponentially more for you in a short space of time than you trying to slowly catch your monkey, build up your socials. Great, it's great to do it that way, but it's also like, if you just put that extra time into making music, this is why the creativity is the name of the game. Just making stuff and putting it out in the world. Like, there comes a point where you just have to stop, say, I'm going to stop posting on social media. If it means I only make 2 posts this month, but I managed to finish 10 records, that is going to be infinitely better for you than being on social media every day, as much as you might think that it's not. In the long term, having that music out in the world and all of the other stuff that happens because you've got music out, all the people that reach out to you, all the people that are listening to it, all the new fans you're gaining because it's on Spotify or YouTube. Because if you don't finish a track, you can't do jack shit with it. If you don't finish
I'm going
music...
to have to turn the explicit flag on this now.
Sorry.
You're the first. I've kept it clean up until this point, so there you go. There's
only once, you'll be all right.
It's very good, and quite far into it, so hopefully nobody will spot it. So this thing you're talking about there of like the kind of put the energy into putting the music out, because there is that other aspect to kind of modern distribution and retail, if we want to call it that, where if you haven't had a track out for a while, and I've over the last half a decade or so worked with artists that were bigger before streaming, so they were kind of at their prominence during, say, download era or even before that, CD era or vinyl or whatever, and so of course there's the algorithmic aspect that's causing them problems when they're coming back to, they're putting new music on the platform, because the way that all of those things work, where you've got, say, a large follower base, but then you haven't got new music out, so people aren't you're not either growing that follower base, right? So it's kind of flatlined, and your streams aren't going up, and they're probably fairly low. And then there's also the ratio, right? If you've got large followers but not very many streams, when you then next put your new bit of music out, the algorithms basically kind of ignore you, because they're like, this person's done. Whereas actually they're like a bona fide celebrity, right? But they, and they've existed in social media, on the TV and on radio and whatever else, right? But when they put that new music out, but they haven't done for half a decade, it kind of doesn't have the same impact. So perhaps also so not only like just to focus on making that music, there are now these days other reasons why you should probably think more about putting those records out, right? I'm sure, I know you don't run into that problem.
It's a shame, because it is not like with Grand Plans we try to do more feature releases, right? Everything has custom artwork. It's all done specifically for that release. I try to do 3 or 4 tracks with every release, because it ties it together. It's a theme. There's a kind of story to it. Whereas it is almost like I would be better off just putting those tracks out one by one. I'm probably doing myself a disservice, because I'm paying more money out in one go. So for example, I just recently did a 7-track EP. It was almost a mini album, and the kind of boring reason was that basically I wanted to have it appear as an album in Spotify, and 7 tracks is what I needed. So I was like, well, I might as well just do it as 7 tracks, because I had another album which I actually mixed a compilation. It wasn't even an artist album, and that was appearing as my album. And it's nothing, it wasn't, I just mixed it. It was a various artists. So I was like, everybody's seeing this 6-year-old, 7-year-old thing. And I want people to see something new. So I basically made it that. But I ended up having to pay more money to promote it, because it was an album, more money to master it, and so on and so forth. Whereas if and obviously the trickle that the way the money comes back is it takes you 2, 3, 4 months. Takes you 4 months from the date you actually send that music off for mastering or for release. To upload for release, to the moment you actually get any royalties. It's usually 4 months. So unless you're consistently in a cycle of putting stuff out, when you're in the cycle of getting paid, you keep getting paid. But if you're doing these bigger releases, you're not putting one out every month. You're not putting 7 tracks out on a label every month that are all by you. So I would be better off going, it's just a single release, just a single release, just a single release, you know.
Yeah, I mean, because we get, I come across this question all the time where, you know, people are going, should we put out track, and then into, say, album or EP, or should we have the body of work out there and then kind of promote that and maybe pull out singles after that, right? Because there's that sort of dichotomy of, well, it's the engagement economy, and therefore you want to continue to engage people, and of course it gives you content, right, with which to promote, and, you know, going back to
things to talk about,
what you were saying earlier about, it's not just the music that goes out there. You can then, you know, create bits of engaging content around based on that original recording to then talk about on social media, have all the different posts, you know. But also there's the other problem, and kind of going into this cash flow thing that you was sort of alluding to earlier. I know, although in dance music you've still got a heavy download component to your revenue matrix, whereas pretty much any other genre doesn't, right? You know, because you
don't need ownership, it's just access. Whereas DJs need ownership.
Streaming is now the accepted way of consuming music, and so why would you bother with buying a download? There's almost no reason to do that these days, because it's ultimately the same device that you'd be using. There's no difference there, right? So I've totally forgotten where I was going with this question. But
cash flow?
Cash flow, thank you. Very good. I think you should interview me. Do you know, the first interview I did was with a journalist, like a professional interviewer. Well, I just thought, as I sort of planned to do that, I thought, that's a silly idea, isn't it? So, I mean, you know, and you know, because obviously what people are kind of concerned with is, you know, that fan engagement. And so if there is a body of work out there, then it gives somebody more to get into, right? And of course, from a revenue point of view, there's more music out there with which to consume and therefore create revenue from. But at the same time, you've kind of lost your ability to continually engage them over a longer period of time, right? You know, whereas I guess like with this 7-track project that you were talking about, you could have perhaps got on the revenue, you know, sort of stream earlier, right? You could have, you know, put a few singles out, brought a bit of that money back in as you were preparing for the whole project to go out, right? But
I guess the answer is, you know, again, it's just about it's that difficult conundrum of trying to create more, but also doing it to a level where the quality is ridiculously high. I mean, there's a reason why traditionally the cycle has always been what it's been. There's a reason why a radio edit is 3 minutes long. There's a reason why people only used to put out albums every 3 or 4 years. That's the downloading period, right? Like that's the period in between of I'm completely like albumed out right now. You know, Tom Petty or Stevie Wonder or Michael Jackson makes that, you know, record 40 or 50 or 100 tracks for an album. You whittle it down to the best 10 or 15. Then you tour the album. You know, then you have 6 months off or a year off. Then you get back in the studio and you start writing another album. And that was the way it worked. And you know, now it's changed. It's changed for the better in some ways. It's fantastic that you can just put music out, and you know, Drake or someone will just put an album up and it will just go up at midnight and that's it. And then he's getting millions of streams around the world the very next day. It's amazing that you can do that. You can reach people, you can put stuff on Bandcamp, you can have your own I can put stuff up on Traxsource and reach that community of DJs in a week or two. It's fantastic, but it does mean that you don't have this time of, it is sort of like turn and burn more quickly. You don't get to necessarily do as many artistic things as you would like to do. And then there's so many other parts to it, unfortunately. There's so many, cracking the code is you know, there's something, it isn't just about it, and then once you get that far, once you get to a point where you're making great music, even that still isn't enough. There's still other components to it, of which I don't know all of them. But
I don't think anyone
there's
does.
Something about why is it that this person resonates with this group of people and this person doesn't, even though their music's better. They made a lot more stuff. They've also been affiliated with the same labels, let's say.
So
they're in the same world,
so
but they're just not
working.
They're just not taking off. They're just not listening. They're just not.
And I can assure you, you're not the only one sort of puzzling that conundrum. And you know, companies spend a lot of time and money, and of course, data these days. You know, we've got a lot of access to that. But you know, even that can't tell you the whole story, because in fact that can confuse you even more, because you're looking at it going, but they're the same numbers. Why is one resonating from a sales point of view and the other one isn't?
Yeah,
you've got the same number of followers. They're posting the same amount of content. Why is one not with the other? So, and I hope for listeners at home that what's obvious with all of this conversation is this kind of continual sort of, as an artist, being dragged back into the business side of it, and so you're having to constantly be conscious of all the sort of moving parts of the industry that you as an artist are part of, and it's clearly complex and can be quite difficult. So I've got a question here which I'm just going to read verbatim because I can't remember exactly why I wrote it, but so business leaders are always monitoring what's working and not working in their business. Do you think that that's true as an artist entrepreneur? I guess we've kind of covered this question a little bit.
Yeah, I guess it is true. On a kind of an ad hoc basis, you're sort of you're just using your instinct, aren't you?
Yeah.
Sort of like, well, that didn't really work out, so I probably won't do that again.
Sort of micro pivots, if you
yeah,
want.
That is a business decision, isn't it? It's just
Yeah.
that I didn't have a meeting with somebody and say, well, you know, this EP didn't sell that well, or this didn't do that well. But you are making those decisions on a kind of micro level every day.
Yeah.
You're basically just deciding, well, I won't use that PR company again, or I'll use somebody else for mastering, or I liked the artwork, or whatever.
Right.
All those kind of little decisions.
Sometimes there's a feeling, right, as well, right? You know, was that mastering engineer the right person for me? Did he understand when I was talking to him or her? Yeah, good. All right, so I'm going to ask you this. It's such an awkward question. Any top tips for budding artists out there? I mean, you were sort of talking about, you know, how difficult some of this stuff is. You know, is this right for everybody to?
No, it's not right for everybody.
Yeah. You know, would they be better kind of like really just trying to track down that, you know, more traditional route where go and get the record deal so you've got the teams around
Potentially. It depends on in what world they are making music or creating, because the model is different for different genres.
Yeah.
You know, if you're a band, there's lots of things you can do yourself, and you've got the support of other people within your band, for example. So things like studio costs, you can share them. Things like, you know, you've basically got 4 or 5 people, so you already have a team, right? That team just happens to be people you're in a band with. So I've always felt that could be quite handy, because you might have one person that is, you know, quite a good producer. They maybe could produce the album, let's say. You might have somebody who is great at graphic design and art concepts and vision, you know, that has a vision for it. That's great. You might have somebody in the band who's quite social media savvy.
Yeah.
So you kind of all have your little roles and you sort of pick up the slack. Whereas if you're just one producer or one artist, you kind of have to do all of that yourself. So that works well potentially in that situation. But it's different for everybody. I think that I was talking to my wife because she's going to basically be coming and helping me full time, essentially.
Right, cool.
And building up the new, you know, the nightlife audio and working on that predominantly, but also helping me with bookings and business development and all these other opportunities that are potentially out there for me, or are out there for me, but I can't capitalize on them because I don't have the time to create enough things to meet all of them, because I have to do all the other stuff. So if she takes some of that responsibility away and does it to a level that it's, you know, good and actually increases and enhances what I'm doing, then it's beneficial. But to go back to your question, I was talking to her about that it's not for everybody. You know, being self-employed is kind of testing, and she is someone that comes from the traditional corporate world where she worked very hard for many years, earned a good salary, company car, all the rest of it. And now she's going to this world where it's like, well, now you have to think about your own cash flow, and you've got to think about you're paying out for this and that, and you know, you've got a studio to run and you're doing all this stuff. You know, you need to buy equipment if you need to do a particular thing, or your computer breaks. You know, she says to me, "You spent all this money on a computer." I said, "Yeah, but it's the cost. It's the cost of doing business."
100%,
I said, if I was driving a refrigerated van, driving around sandwiches to people, and I spent £10,000 on a van, you wouldn't say anything to me about it, because you'd be like, well, you're in that van every day driving around earning money. And that's what I do with my laptop or with my equipment,
I mean,
or whatever.
in the short term, it might be cheaper to go to a studio, but certainly not in the long term.
Absolutely, when you amortise that cost every day over 4 years, which is, and
Yeah.
I'm a heavy user of most of my equipment, especially my laptop, which is the hub of everything.
Yeah.
It really isn't that expensive at all. But of course, it's a lot for some. When you work for a company that gives you a laptop for work and gives you a company car, and you know, the idea of kind of taking all of that risk and expense on yourself seems a bit silly, I guess. But that's kind of the cost of doing business. So no, it's not for everybody. You do have to be. I would say if somebody's working right now and they would like to go full time and do music, you sort of have to you have to basically do both until you can't do both anymore.
Yeah.
Until you literally cannot. There's just not enough hours to kind of fulfill all of it, and then at that point maybe you'll know that it's time for you to make a decision. But yeah, you have to really think about it and don't take on unnecessary debt. You know, can't try and be as lean as you can in terms of those kind of things.
Yeah.
It will help make it easier and mean you'll be under less pressure and stress and that kind of thing.
So this is really interesting. So what you've just described there is pretty much like the definition of this entrepreneur aspect to it, which I looked it up because I thought I probably should know the exact words from the Collins English Dictionary. And entrepreneur is the owner or manager of a business enterprise who, by risk and initiative, attempts to make profits. And that's kind of what you're getting at there, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, your wife's transition from being in the corporate world to suddenly being an entrepreneur along with you, really.
Right.
You know, she's going to have to start taking these risks, which you've just accepted as part and parcel of your life, in the sort of the hope to make profit as the entrepreneurial bit, the business bit of it.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, as we said before, you're both sides of this artist as the entrepreneur, because you are also the artist. You know, it's
right. There is. I think. Yeah. I mean, risk is one of the big. Excuse me.
Sorry.
Risk is one of the big things that separates me and her. I think men are generally more risk averse than women anyway.
Ooh, controversial.
I think it's true.
Oh,
There's studies that show that, you know, women are more interested in people and men are more interested in things, generally speaking.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's why women tend to gravitate towards certain types of jobs and men tend to gravitate towards certain types of other jobs.
Interesting.
And there's studies that show that you know, it isn't that women tend to go into, say, more nursing types of roles because they're more interested in people than they are in things. Right. And that's a people role. Right. I've actually done studies in places like Sweden, which is like very egalitarian, very split, but you still see the same differences. So it isn't anything to do with inequality of opportunity or that women are being forced to do this and men are being forced to do that. It is that, you know, not to get into another debate, it's a completely different thing, but my point in saying that is that, you know, me and my wife are very I'm very open to taking risks. Yeah. She's very risk averse. Yeah. And she's going to have to slightly adapt her mindset, and probably I'll have to slightly adapt mine to accept the fact that we're now working together, and for her to feel comfortable, maybe I have to take slightly less risks than I would do if it was just me on my own, and she's going to have to take slightly more, and maybe that works as a good counterbalancing system. And that's, you know, the old thing of, you know, what couples say, well, we work well together because, you know, she likes cleaning up, and, you know, I like cooking, and I like, you know, I do all the laundry, and she, you know, she makes all the food, or I do this and drop the kids off, and we split the duties, you know.
Of course.
And so that's kind of why but also within that, not just in terms of how you live together, but in terms of your day to day, like, well, I like doing this kind of thing, and I'm more like this in my personality, and they're more like that, and so you kind of end up gelling well together because you kind of balance each other out. I'm always worried about things, and I'm very calm, and so, you know, and we balance each other out. So I think there's an element of that kind of in life, and also within business as well. Sure. And obviously the two mix if you work with the people that you're in a relationship with or in your family. So we'll see how that goes, but yeah, you're right. It is really about taking risks, and after a while, it just becomes second nature. Yeah. You don't really think about it. You just try to manage your day to day, manage your cash flow, think about what's coming in. You know that you have to get in the studio and do things if, you know, you need to earn money, or you've got, right, this thing's almost finished. I need to finish it because I'm not going to get paid if I don't finish it. And that's the ultimate sort of you know, the ultimate end game is like monetizing what you've spent all this time on. That's kind of the payoff, right?
Yeah.
But doing all of these things and working on them and never getting them finished is never going to get you paid.
Yeah.
You can't do anything with a half finished. You've got 4 half finished tracks.
Yeah.
You can't do anything. You can't sell them to anyone. You can't put them on a label. You can't monetize them.
Yeah.
But if you've got 2 finished records,
Yeah.
you can.
Yeah, yeah.
So you're better off having 2 finished records than 4 or 5 or 6 unfinished ones.
Yeah. I mean,
So
did you ever get though to a point like you're partway through a track and you're just sort of thinking, you know what, this isn't working. I've just got to scrap it and start again. Does that happen to you?
yes, but then you can use. But then generally, depends on. I'll either just leave it and start something new.
Yeah.
Or I'll go on to a different idea, and I'll flick back and forth through maybe 10 things I'm working on that are all kind of at the idea stage, incubation stage. I do what's called incubation, where I will basically start an idea.
Yeah.
I'll really like it, and then I'll leave it. And when I go back to it, I want to like it as much as I did. I want to get that feeling again straight away when I go back to it. That's what's called incubating. So you let it, you live with it basically.
Yeah.
And essentially, I guess it's a psychological way of saying, do I love this idea? Is this an idea that moves me? Is it worth pursuing?
Yeah, right.
And if you get that same feeling when you keep going back to it and it excites you, and you manage to listen to it for an hour and it's just looping around, the chances are it's probably a pretty good idea. So you should probably pursue that and develop it. And then the next challenge is trying not to mess it up, basically. Trying to keep that feeling that you had with 30 seconds going around when it's a 5-minute track, and not getting caught up and bogged down in the, you know, the technicalities and making it sound like, because that's what happens when you start to get past that point.
Right.
So, but also another thing, because I do a lot of sound design, a lot of samples, I could turn that track into samples.
So it's not
provided
it's
I've
not
created
wasted
things.
effort.
Provided I've created the things, or I could just go, well, I didn't make that, so I can't use that.
Right.
But this piano I can, and this bass line I can, and this, you know, vocal cut up that I use, which is from a session I did with somebody or whatever.
Yeah.
So you can actually make use of it, and that's one of the other great things about getting into that world, because it means that you can kind of trim the fat basically, and use that to go into something else. And you know, one man's trash or something that you're not moved by is another man's gold. They may love that that stab or that particular thing. So you have those possibilities there as well, but it all depends.
Another great example of you know, that entrepreneurial side, you know, creeping into the artist world.
No,
I wonder if everybody thinks in the same way. I'm not sure that they do. So I think as we're an hour and 20, that's pretty good, right? My aim of these 20-minute podcasts has just absolutely gone to hell, but that's good because this has been fascinating and really, really interesting. Thank you so much for your time, Scott.
Happy to do it. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. I will put links to Scott's website and his podcast in the show notes. So to my listeners, thank you for listening. And once again, I welcome all feedback, comments and suggestions for future shows. My Twitter is @AlexBranson. And if you want to message me directly, just put podcast DM. I'll follow you back and we can have a private discussion. Or head to my website, which is www.abcmusic.co. There's a contacts page there with my email address on. So thank you once again, Scott. And thank you for listening.